This series, we're talking about evidence for God's existence. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, there's no evidence for God's existence.
Ooh, perceptive, this one. Today we start a series of videos that I plan on making in which we will be analyzing a series of videos created by the North Coast Church about evidence of God. So far there are 5 videos uploaded to their channel as part of this series, and I believe that's all that there will be, though I have not yet finished watching all of them myself. We'll try to do one video on this channel for each individual episode in their series, but based on them only being 5-minute videos, we may eventually double up depending on the amount of material to dissect. And finally, be sure to stick around to the end of this video for a new channel recommendation. Alright, let's get to it.
Sometimes we have a semantic problem here. There's 2 different kinds of evidence that we mean when we're talking about the word. The first one is empirical evidence. We might ask the question, what temperature does water boil at? And the way that we do that is we take water, we put it in a laboratory, we heat it to the exact same temperature again and again and see if it boils at a consistent temperature. Being able to repeat that, observe it, and then measure it allows us to have what we call empirical evidence. Testable, verifiable, in a lab, repeatedly evidence.
Okay, I can accept that definition for the sake of this video.
Now, when we're talking about things that happened in the past, we use something called forensic evidence.
Forensic evidence is another thing that I could be willing to grant you as being a type of evidence worthwhile in this discussion. However, I will only do so under the understanding that the only way in which we can draw meaningful data from the past for forensic evidence is based on the empirical evidence that we gather from our observations of how things happen in the present and our understanding of the ways in which those processes have changed between the modern day and the time period for when we are looking to discern cause and effect. Meaning that if you are to assert going forward that something that we have no empirical evidence for was the cause of something in the past, I will rescind my willingness to grant you any legitimacy in your claims of forensic evidence for the existence of God.
I believe we have forensic evidence. I think that nature and science and biology and cosmology and astrophysics points to the fact that we have forensic evidence that God exists.
You, sir, are unsurprisingly already on thin ice. Show me the empirical evidence that we can currently observe which, while it may not support the likelihood, it at least establishes the possibility that the cause of any of those things you just listed could have been a magical one as your God implies, or you have no case based on forensic evidence. Before you can show that we have any reason to believe that what you are claiming did happen, you first must prove that it is even possible for it to happen at all, which you have not done.
And when we say that, we ask this question, what's the best explanation? What explanation best satisfies all the different necessary elements to our universe?
For any explanation to be not just the best, but even to be considered possible, it must be based on phenomena that can be verified as having happened before. So I can already tell you that the best explanation is not going to be your God unless you can prove his existence empirically.
So what do we see in our universe? We see this common idea of love and morality.
At a societal level, for the most part, sure. But if love and morality were given by God, we would expect to see them extend equally to all people in all circumstances, and all it takes is checking the statistics on how many people are in prison right now to tell empirically that all people do not have the same stance on morality.
We see complexity and design. We'll start by calling it complexity. Things that seem to be irreducibly complex, that work so perfectly together as if it were put that way.
It's a bit of a reach to say that we see things to be irreducibly complex. Perhaps you do, but that's merely a fault in your own personal misunderstanding of biology and the world around you. Any biological system that you might consider to be irreducibly complex could be explained to you if you simply had the genuine desire to understand rather than simply a desire to assert as fact what you cannot show to be demonstrably true.
We see that the universe is expansive, that it's bigger, that all space and time came into existence at a certain point.
And despite the fact that we do not yet have all of the answers surrounding the beginning of the universe, we continue to learn more each day. Every second that you simply sit back and say that anything we do not understand yet is a product of your God, the influence of your God of the gaps continues to shrink by the moment.
And so we ask the question, what's the best explanation for why all those things are that way?
To which I assume you will assert God, though I will remind you that in order to justifiably do so, you must first, at the very least, prove that the supernatural is even possible, let alone that it takes the form of your own choice deity.
That's the idea of apologetics. We're pitching, we believe, that God is the best explanation for the universe that we observe. We'll start today with the simple one, which is the question that a lot of third graders ask. Why is there something rather than nothing? So think about that. The universe, why is it even here? Couldn't it much more easily just not be here?
Well, to put it simply, your answer is in the fact that you are able to ask the question in the first place. There is something rather than nothing, because if there was not, you would not be here to question the antithesis. For example, with the information that we have now, it could be very well that the universe is somewhat cyclical, starting each time with a Big Bang which expands for billions of years until it eventually collapses in on itself, creating another singularity from which yet another Big Bang can occur. While that's a simple way of putting it, that is a position that is held by plenty of scientists. As I'm not an astrophysicist myself, I cannot claim as to whether or not this is likely to be the case, but if we were to assume that it is, the universe in that scenario has likely begun countless times in ways which did not allow for the formation of life as we know it. There could have been nothing in those universes at all, at least in terms of what we as humans would consider to be something, and yet nobody would have questioned at the time why there ought to be nothing rather than something. Your position in the universe creates your perception. Because all that you have ever consciously known is something, the idea of nothing becomes somewhat mythical, as you did not evolve with any need to ever understand it.
It's infinitely more complicated that you are here, that I am here, that whatever device you're watching that's able to stream these different wavelengths throughout the whole What is that?
Yes, it is statistically unlikely for everything to be exactly as it is right now. However, when you have what could be an infinite amount of time for the universe to eventually produce a particular result, every result will eventually come to fruition. You do things every day that likely seem completely normal, but are nonetheless very statistically unlikely. What are the odds that you wake up in the exact nanosecond that you do each morning? What are the odds that when you pour your Cheerios in the morning, you pour exactly 184 Cheerios into your bowl? What are the odds that on the way to work, your vehicle follows the exact pattern of speed that it does on any given morning? Just because something is statistically unlikely does not mean that it requires an interjection of magic in order to explain it.
Why is it there? And wouldn't it be easier if it just wasn't here?
I'm not sure easier is necessarily the right word. In a process that is unthinking, like the expansion of the universe, there is no concept of good or bad, right or wrong. As thinking beings within that universe, we assign these traits to things depending on how they affect us. We think of a universe which allows for us, in our current form, to exist as being beneficial because we are seeing it from the perspective of beings that would prefer to exist. But just as we assign special significance to a royal flush in a game of poker, we apply special significance to a universe which allows us to exist as we do now, despite the fact that any random hand of 5 cards is just as statistically unlikely as any other.
So, we say, well, what is the universe? Is the universe eternal? Because if it's always been here, then it doesn't really need an explanation. It's just always there. Well, we know that the universe isn't eternal. In fact, cosmology backs that up. Every single working model that we have of the universe necessitates that there was a time at which there was nothing. It doesn't really matter who you ask. Let me even quote a couple of atheist astrophysicists and atheist cosmologists.
This should be fun.
There's a guy named Robert Jastrow. He's agnostic. That means he's not quite sure if there is a God.
I'll let that go for now.
Director of the whole NASA program. He says, the essential element in the astronomical and the biblical account of Genesis are the same. He says, for the non-believing scientist, the story might end like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He's about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries.
A few things to note here. First of all it takes is a cursory glance at the credentials of Robert Jastrow to know that he was absolutely not ever the head of the entire NASA program, as you stated before his quote. In addition to this, his record is rather spotty at best from what I can find. First of all, while he claimed to be agnostic, he eventually grew to hold a deistic worldview, holding the view that the beginning of a universe also implies an intelligent creator behind said beginning, which is not supported by the evidence, as no proof that anything supernatural can even exist has ever been brought forward. In addition to this, Jastrow was a founding member of the George C. Marshall Institute, which would go on to oppose scientific consensus on anthropogenic climate change. Can't say that I'm necessarily quaking in my boots about the fact that this man also thought that cosmology might point to a god, but even if we were to grant his assertion of a creator in order for the universe to have begun, which I will not, it still wouldn't do anything to prove your particular god.
Quinton Smith, atheist professor of philosophy at Western Michigan, said, the central idea of this cosmology, that means study of the beginning, that the universe exploded into existence about 15 billion years ago or so, seems like it was tailor-made to fit the theistic God hypothesis. In fact, Big Bang cosmology seemed to offer empirical evidence for the religious doctrine of creating something out of nothing, which is what Genesis talks about.
Even more interesting on this one, Quentin Smith is in fact a professor of philosophy, as you said. The interesting thing about the quote that you just attributed to him is that it fundamentally goes against all of the writings that I can find from him on this topic. In fact, Quentin Smith has debated William Lane Craig about the existence of a god. So while I cannot find the exact quote that you cite here, I have two leading theories about it. My first theory, which is the one I had as soon as you ended your quote, is that you likely took this quote out of context, as it sounds as though there is meant to be a clarifying statement either before or after this quote, which shows why it is not a valid argument. My second theory is that this quote may come from a book called Theism, Atheism, and Big Bang Cosmology, which was jointly written by Quentin Smith and the aforementioned William Lane Craig. If that is the case, my personal favorite explanation for this quote is that it is actually a quote from William Lane Craig that you didn't take out of context, but rather attributed to the author who was defending the exact opposite position in the same book. To put it lightly, your quotes do not impress me.
So if we're walking along, we see a golf ball on top of a mountain, and I ask you, why is it there? And you say, it doesn't matter, or it's always been there. Your answers are wrong.
Well, one could argue that it really doesn't matter why the golf ball may be sitting on the rock. However, I agree that one would be wrong to assert that the golf ball had always been there. We know this because we know that golf balls are man-made objects that do not occur in nature, and therefore we have empirical evidence to support the fact that the golf ball has not always been there.
There's got to be an explanation for why it's there. Now think, if that golf ball, instead of being golf ball sized, was the size of a house, and I asked the same question, would it still need a valid answer? Yeah.
I mean, if the golf ball was the size of a house, all that means is that somebody made a house-sized golf ball and put it on the rock. I still don't really see where you're going with this, but I can't imagine it's going to be anywhere worthwhile.
Size would not dictate how important that question is. Now imagine that golf ball is as big as the universe is, and we ask the same question, what's that golf ball doing there?
Well, damn, that would be pretty impressive if somebody were to create a golf ball that was the size of the universe. Unbelievable almost. Almost like if you had any academic integrity, you would not accept it without some damn good empirical evidence to back it up.
Well, of course, we know that just because the golf ball got bigger doesn't mean it doesn't require an explanation. So the atheist has asked this question. The universe, if it's just a massive golf ball, still requires the same explanation. Why is it there when it could much more easily not be there?
Does he think that this is an actual good question? Like he's saying it like it's some sort of gotcha question that's supposed to trip atheists up and make them rethink their worldview. Well, I've got some bad news for you, bud, because we have empirical proof that humans do exist, and that golf balls are made by humans. So it would be even more likely that humans created such a universe-sized golf ball rather than your god, as we at least have the prerequisite knowledge about the existence of both the humans and their ability to make things, whereas we still have no proof that anything supernatural does or even can exist.
What we know to be true is if that golf ball had a beginning, if that universe had a beginning, then before that, if at the beginning of that, all space, time, and matter came into existence at one point, then before there was space, time, or matter, there was nothing.
What is the point of the golf ball analogy if you are just going to shift between it and the model of the actual universe without any sort of connective tissue?
And if there was nothing, then we have certain needs in order to create everything, because nothing can't do anything. So we need something that isn't contingent, that isn't inside of space or time or matter, something that is immaterial, spaceless, timeless. That means there's something that we're looking for that was able to create everything that is neither spaceless, timeless, or immaterial. And when you look at Scripture, that's exactly the definition of God we get. That's the first piece of forensic evidence for why God exists.
Wow, that is 2 videos in a row that made me feel like I had phased into a completely different reality in the last minute. What the hell was the point of that golf ball analogy? Does he think he proved something with that? Hell, maybe he did, because I sure as fuck couldn't follow his sentence structure while he was trying to do so. The biggest problem that I can think to point out within the little bit of that I may have understood is the fact that everything that we can empirically prove exists in this universe. In order for us to have empirical evidence of something, it necessarily must exist in this universe. So in order for us to have any sort of empirical evidence for your god, which we would need in order for you to assert any sort of forensic evidence based on him, he would have to exist in this universe. You are arguing that your god exists outside of our universe. If something exists outside of this universe, that means that it does not exist inside this universe, meaning that by your own arguing, there is no evidence for your god. There, did I say that about as coherently as he did? Before we wrap this video up, it's time for a shout out. Drum roll, please. What? We don't have a drum? God damn it, what do we have? Really? All we have is a... Fuck it, ukulele roll, please. Meet UnholyRoast, a new up-and-coming atheist YouTuber that I stumbled across recently and have been thoroughly enjoying. If you're looking for another channel in a similar vein to mine that you might enjoy, or you're just interested in some very satisfying coffee visuals in the background, I definitely recommend giving this channel a look. At the time of me writing this script, his channel is sitting at 33 subscribers with 10 videos uploaded in the past 3 months. My initial plan was to try and get his channel up to over 100 subscribers to encourage him to continue making quality content, but in the time it took me to record this video, his channel has already made its way up to 148 subscribers, so I guess let's shoot for trying to push him at least over the 200 subscriber mark. I'll put the link in the first line of the description down below. Let him know that God is not good sent you. As I said at the beginning, this is the first episode of a 5-video series which I will be covering in its entirety, hopefully over the next month or so. If you have any other videos that you'd like to see me respond to in the future, please be sure to let me know in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like and be sure to subscribe for future content. Thank you all very much for watching, and as always, have a blessed day, fellow heathens.